Hello everyone, welcome to Winthrop in the World. I'm Paul Basken, and with us today is DiZoglio, the state auditor in Massachusetts. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Paul. Great to be here.
So you've been the state auditor since 2022. Before that, a member of the elected member of the Massachusetts State Senate and the Massachusetts House of Representatives.
Yes, I was elected to the House of Representatives in 2012 and served 6 years alongside of other members of the legislature as a state representative representing portions of the Merrimack Valley, and then I ran for...
Up around Methuen's your hometown?
Yes, Methuen and other surrounding communities. And then 6 years after I had started that role, I became a senator, served as a senator for 4 years, representing portions of the Merrimack Valley and North Shore. And recently in 2022 was elected to the position of state auditor, and am humbly serving residents as the state's chief accountability officer in the state of Massachusetts. And our office's mission is to help make government work better. So before you turn the dial, hearing that the auditor is on TV right now, I don't audit any of you. I do not look at your tax returns. I am not the IRS. We actually audit government for you to make sure that your tax dollars are being spent efficiently and effectively, and I do so, again, as your elected, not appointed, state auditor. And we write reports, we pass them back on to the community, almost like public service journalism, where we shine a light on what's going on in the dark areas of state government. We make information more accessible to everybody so that you can be your own best advocate, make informed decisions about what you think about what's going on in state government, and also so we can make sure that we're holding state entities to account to make sure that money is not being mismanaged, or wasted or abused. And we also look at programmatic efficiencies and inefficiencies, and we make recommendations to different state entities about how they can make improvements. I do think it's important to say that we do not have any authority to require any state entities to take action on certain issues. We can advise them, and we do not have any authority over the budget. So our office cannot cut funding, cannot add funding to the budget. We report to the legislature and to the administration our findings, and then they, with their respective roles as members of the legislature and the governor and the governor's administration, they make decisions about which policies to implement or not to implement based on that information.
So maybe in many situations the people of Massachusetts might not know the state auditor, but I think you're already pretty well known in the state because of the referendum question we just had last year. It was the number one question that won with more than 70% of the vote, which was to audit the state legislature. It seems like that's a idea that's become difficult to enact because this obviously the legislature doesn't want to be audited. Maybe you could talk about why that felt important to do, how realistic it is to audit an entity that doesn't want to be audited and has some power to push back against that?
Yeah, so look, we tried to conduct an audit after I got elected of the state legislature because it was something that residents were raising to me. During my entire campaign. I campaigned for state auditor for almost 2 years, and during that time frame, I was repeatedly, everywhere I went, asked if I would audit the state legislature. And people actually asked me about this, Paul, because they knew I was a member of the Senate, and they wanted to make sure that if I became auditor, that I was actually going to conduct an audit of the legislature as well, because one hadn't been conducted in quite some time. It's important to say that when I tried to conduct that audit, and I highlighted the over 100 times that the legislature had been audited before throughout history, because there's over 100 years setting precedent for an audit.
When was the last, I mean, we're talking 100 years ago?
1991.
Oh, not that long ago.
1991. Yeah, we originally thought it was over 100 years ago, and then our office did some digging, and we found audits all the way through 1991. And, you know, unfortunately, during that time frame, these audits stopped happening, and then it was just kind of thought that they didn't happen anymore. They didn't have to happen. So when I ran for office, people asked me to commit to starting that process again. But when I went in to conduct the audit of the legislature, I got tremendous pushback. And folks didn't want to comply, and they balked at the idea of showing the finances of the Senate and the House, and letting us see their state contracts and other documents that generally speaking, are a matter of public record in every other state entity.
Right.
I believe, here in Winthrop, financial documents and state contracts, like is the case in every other community, are a matter of public record,
yeah.
and any member of the public can get access to those documents.
Right.
But the state legislature refused to give even the Office of State Auditor the ability to review those financial and contracting documents. So we ended up asking the voters to weigh in on what they thought about this, and to update the law so that the law was more explicit in calling out the need for the legislature to be audited the same way other entities in the state are audited.
But what are you looking for? Like, what's a question that we don't know about the state legislature that an audit could answer?
Yeah, and 72% of the voters voted for this, and what they wanted access to was pretty much anything that they could to help to increase transparency, Paul, just to answer your question.
Right.
Because really, I mean, it's not just an audit that people are looking for. This is just one thing that I think people felt would help to increase some transparency and accountability in a legislative body that, for as forward-thinking as we are here in Massachusetts, unfortunately continues to be ranked as the least transparent state legislature in the entire nation.
But people know that. I mean,
Yeah.
so that really we're waiting on the legislature to do that anyway. So is there really a realistic hope that that's going to change as a result of this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that people are expecting this audit, and they shouldn't expect this audit to be some saving grace regarding the state legislature's shortcomings. We have a lot of work to do in the state, and every entity of government needs a lot of work, I mean, there are human beings that work in state departments and state agencies, so we expect that there will be shortcomings, because robots don't work there, humans do.
Right.
However, I think folks are fed up with willful refusal to just show us how the money is being spent at a bare minimum.
Right.
And, we get to look at programmatic efficiencies and inefficiencies in these departments. And I think people want us to take a look at how we can improve upon services. That's what we do in all of these other state entities. So why would anybody refuse that opportunity? We're not the FBI.
Well, one thing that occurs to me is that here in Winthrop, we've actually, I mean, I'll put it this way, one of the main problems people say about the legislature is it's too top-heavy, that the speaker and the Senate president get to basically be kings of the thing. And that actually worked out for us in Winthrop pretty well, because we had a speaker who was in charge for more than a decade. So maybe that's a reason why. I mean, is there a hope that you're really going to overturn that system in this legislature and make it somehow a more democratic entity?
A system of shared leadership, I think, serves all communities across the state. And, when you have absolute power, it does corrupt absolutely, right? So I think that, people across the state really want to see that system of shared leadership where their reps, their senators, regardless of where they live, regardless of what their family background is, their zip code, their status on Beacon Hill, that they'll get a fair shot at opportunities for their communities, and that there will be a more equitable way of distributing these grants, equitable way of distributing, or deciding what bills get passed and what don't get passed, that things will be considered on their merit and not just based on who happens to be in charge that year.
And is that something you saw? Is that partly why you ran for auditor? Because you saw that while you served in the House and Senate?
So, I ran for auditor to have a greater platform and a stronger voice for the issues that I was pushing during my time as a state legislator. And a lot of those issues that I fought to, pass and fought to make sure were happening were transparency related, accountability related, equity related, and accessibility related. And I did, as a state senator, I remember one rules debate I filed, I think it was 21 amendments to the rules package to try to update how we did business in the legislature. But I also, for many years, fought against the use of these non-disclosure agreements that are taxpayer funded. For the sake of making sure that employees in state government are not silenced about potential harassment, discrimination, abuses, or potential corruption that's happening. And I fought as a legislator to pass bills to stop the abuse of those agreements using your taxpayer dollars to silence people. But as your state auditor, before I had run for state auditor, I campaigned on utilizing this office to continue to fight that fight. As your state auditor, I just recently released a very lengthy report on the abuse of these non-disclosure agreements across state government. And as a result, the Boston City Council, as a result of this and other things, decided to ban the use of taxpayer-funded NDAs, and they cited this report.
So just so people know what you're talking about, it's been people where you have a situation where someone gets pushed out of a job and they're told, you can get your severance pay. We'll give you $100,000 in severance, but just you have to sign an agreement not to talk about what happened. That's what you're getting at.
Right, yeah. Folks who have experienced some negative experience in the workplace, and you know, this happens in the private sector, but you know, for my part in the public sector, you know, being the accountability officer, essentially, you know, providing oversight in this area, we've highlighted how these agreements get abused in the public sector. And recently, the governor and this administration did come out as a result of the report that we drafted, and they banned the use of non-disclosure agreements across all executive branch agencies. So we have made progress, and certainly, yes, to answer your question, this office has absolutely allowed me to fight the fights that were taking place in the state legislature on these issues as your state auditor, and continue that fight for increased transparency and accountability with respect to the use of taxpayer dollars.
Okay, so one of the main reasons you're of big attention here in Winthrop and several other towns around Greater Boston, as you know, is the 3A law. And for people to remind people, that's also known as the MBTA Communities Act. It basically requires pretty much all the cities and towns around Boston, any town that has MBTA service, which is pretty much all of them, to rezone in a way that allows alternatives to single-family housing. And you've gotten involved in that. In the legislature, you voted in favor of it. So you're generally in favor of 3A, with the idea is to help more housing and to get it near transit. That's the basic idea, and you were in favor of that. But yes, go ahead.
Yes, and I can start answering this question, and then if you want to jump in, feel free.
Sure.
Yes, so the MBTA Communities Act was a bipartisan supported bill. We went through it when I was in the...
Almost unanimous.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, so it was not a Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative issue. This was something that received a tremendous amount of bipartisan support. And yes, I was someone who voted in favor of this, working to increase housing. I voted in favor of this. I also happen to live in an MBTA community myself. I live in an MBTA zoned neighborhood, actually, proudly, and I did actually encourage for my hometown of Methuen that the City Council adopt these provisions. We did so with an 8-to-1 vote, actually, in the city of Methuen, and we were able to move forward. We did, however, from communities, including my own hometown, who voted for this and actually adopted this. We received questions in our Division of Local Mandates in our office about the funding aspect of the law and why that exists. And I will ask just for some moments here, because there are a lot of questions about this, so I'm going to try my best to answer this for you. So with the Division of Local Mandates, the Division of Local Mandates in my office...
Within your office,
within my office, actually is required to look at unfunded mandate questions when we are requested to do so. By law, we are required to do this. And this is the result of a 1983 ballot initiative citizens petition that was passed that requires that our office look at the funding components with local mandates when we are asked by local communities.
So can I just briefly say that, so when the idea is that when the state passes a law that requires a city or town to do something, the state in general has to provide the funding that the state or city or town has to spend on it.
Correct. Now, what happened with this issue is that when it was originally passed, there were questions about whether or not it was a true mandate.
You're talking about 3A. When 3A was passed, questions of whether that was an actual mandate.
Whether it was an actual mandate. That's why it went before the SJC. When the SJC determined...
The Supreme Court in the state of Massachusetts.
So when they decided that this was a mandate, that triggered the local mandate law, because before that it was considered by many to be optional. Some thought it was a mandate, some thought it was optional. You would lose some grants, but you know, it was up to the community whether or not they wanted to make that choice. Once the SJC made the determination that this is a mandate, that means it is required law. And the determination of our office was required of us to release to the communities who requested by law, because our office is held to the law too. And when we got requested to determine whether or not this mandate was funded or not.
Right.
We look at things pertaining to the law, such as whether or not funding was included in the law contemporaneously, and whether or not funding is provided to all communities that are required to comply.
Right.
And what our office uncovered is that while the legislature, to their credit and to this administration's credit, did try to ensure that some of these costs were subsidized in some cases by creating a grant program, that because communities have to apply for that grant money and then get approved in a process outside of the law, that does not actually constitute contemporaneous, just meaning at the same time, funding with the law that is guaranteed for the implementation of this law. So that is a very quick fix in the legislation, Paul, and I've actually drafted a letter to this administration and to the Attorney General giving them the language that needs to be updated so that the legislature can make sure an appropriation in the budget is put aside so that this funding issue can be resolved. It needs to be clarified, though. This is a funding mechanism issue. This is not whether or not the law needs to be followed. That needs to be made clear. The law is the law. The SJC made that determination. The question here is, you know, when and if, you know, the legislature is going to decide to ensure that the funds that are due to communities actually make their way to those communities.
And do you have even a rough idea how much money this would cost the state to pay the unfunded mandate portion of 3A compliance?
So because the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities in their fiscal impact statement did not actually put that report out looking at zoning compliance with planning and consulting fees being included, because that's what the law says. The law says you have to zone, so those zoning costs are essentially those direct costs, and that is what the EOHLC folks did not include in their financial impact statement. Our office needs that financial impact statement in order to make the determination that this is funded. So we're waiting on the administration.
So I didn't necessarily expect you could give a dollar figure on that estimate of what it would cost us, but one big question seems like has been sitting out there is whether fundamentally the cost would be just the cost of drafting, like having somebody in your town sit behind a desk and rewrite your zoning map, that cost. Or is it it could potentially get into the cost of if the zoning change puts 1,000 more people in your town and that puts 300 more kids in your school, and those kids, each of those kids cost the town, I don't know, what's it cost now? These $30,000. I mean, whatever the number is, a lot, but essentially a large amount of money. Is that potentially what you're talking about in terms of the unfunded mandate part of it?
So EOHLC, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, under this administration, is actually authorized to make those types of determinations regarding direct costs. So they're actually responsible in their regulations for determining what a direct cost is. The Office of State Auditor does not determine what a direct cost is.
I see.
EOHLC determines what a direct cost is.
That acronym is what entity?
Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. So they're the ones that are responsible for rolling
a state
out.
Agency. Yeah.
Yes, they're the ones responsible for rolling out these regulations. They were improperly rolled out at the beginning of this, so they had to redo some of those things. And one of the issues here with determining all of this is that they haven't actually determined themselves, which they're authorized to do, we're not, what those direct costs are. They're the ones authorized to determine what constitutes a direct cost. We just look at the numbers and make sure that they match.
So I hear that. So you're saying there's a state agency that's going to make that decision, but I guess I'm asking is, in your assessment, is it potentially that kind of money we're talking about? I mean, this could be massive amounts of money.
I think it's important to note that the law does say zoning, and that the zoning costs, that folks are looking at this from across the board, essentially, in terms of what constitutes a direct cost, because that's what the law says, a direct cost with respect to the language of the law, which says you're required to zone. So direct costs associated with planning and consulting.
So it sounds like
fees.
you're thinking of at least your guess is that it's the lower. It would be the lower.
In conversations with the administration, that's what they have been saying, and they're the ones that decide and authorize these things and decide what a direct cost is. indirect costs are not part of the local mandate law. So if there are indirect costs, that's not part of the local mandate law, which is where our office really has its responsibility. So the Office of State Auditor has a small role to play in these determinations, and that is essentially to look at what the regulations that the administration set forth say about what a direct cost is, and then we look to make sure that those direct costs that they specify that exist are actually funded alongside of the law.
So I know you've made clear that you supported 3A law when you were in the legislature, and you still support it now. But it's clear in this town, at least, and maybe some others, that your ruling on indirect costs is being seized upon by 3A opponents. As a matter of fact, some of whom I gather you're meeting here in town with, as sort of making you sort of as a hero for having done something to sort of throw sand in the gears of 3A implementation. What do you make of that?
Yeah, our office calls balls and strikes when it comes to these types of determinations. There is a team in our office that is full of audit professionals, attorneys, and folks that do this. They're not looking at this from those types of political perspectives. They're looking at the law, and they're calling balls and strikes. And it's my responsibility to make sure that I am articulating what those balls and strikes mean, what they don't mean, and if people want to advocate for their position on a particular issue, that's everybody's right to do. But it is important that people know what the position of the Office of State Auditor is, and that is that the SJC made the determination that this is a mandate, that it is the law, which means it's the law, and the Office of State Auditor is saying that the law needs to be funded in accordance with another law, which is the local mandate law, so that that money that the state owes these communities is not left on the table. And that's what the Office of State Auditor is saying.
No, I see. So I hear the balls and strikes analogy you're making in terms of calling it as you see it. But there's certainly people, a lot of people, it seems like, who think that your decision there is momentous in the case. I guess I just want to be as clear as possible that you don't see it necessarily as a deal breaker for 3A and 3A compliance, it sounds like.
This has nothing to do with whether or not the law is the law. The SJC made that determination, and the auditors in our office respect the decision of the SJC. It's a mandate according to the Supreme Court here in Massachusetts, and the Supreme Court has the authority to make those determinations. The law is the law. Our office, again, calls balls and strikes. And Paul, the job would be a lot easier if you didn't have to do it, right? And you could kind of just do whatever you wanted. But the reality is that we take these responsibilities very seriously. The office has a legal obligation to tell people when there is funding that is supposed to accompany a mandate that's put on the community. But it's not an endorsement one way or the other. It is just communities should get the funding that's legally required. I'm going to give you an example. Early voting. So when I was in the legislature, I voted for early voting. I was really excited to give folks the opportunity to come into their local clerk's office to make sure that they could cast their vote in elections before election day, to make sure that we were helping people to get more access to the polls. But when push came to shove, we got contacted by a lot of cities and towns. And those cities and towns, you know what they said to us? They said, we support the law, Auditor. However, we also need to make sure that we can fund this early access to voting, and we don't have the resources. Here are the financial costs associated with fulfilling the state's mandate on our community. And folks need to understand that those folks weren't accused of, being in opposition to early voting or taking one position or the other. The conversation was as it should be. It was about the funding component, making sure that the state followed the local mandate law, and whatever costs were associated, that those costs were provided. Now, those costs are now provided because our office made that determination, and now your communities get paid by the state, as they should, for those early voting costs to help your local clerks and election officials.
Good. I'm glad you brought that issue up, because looking back at the number of decisions that your Office of Local Mandates has issued over the past decade, it seems like there's only, I think I counted 16 on your website, and most of those are about voting issues. So that's why the decision on 3A seems curious, because it's not a topic well, first of all, there's not a lot of rulings that you issue at all on local funding, on local mandates, and of the ones you do, they're all pretty much have to do with voting. So
for those who are curious, I'll answer the question as to why we did a mandate determination on something that wasn't to do with voting. Because it was requested by multiple communities, and our office doesn't select based on theme or topic what we're going to analyze. We are required under law to look at a mandate and make a determination based on if a community requests that we do so. So if you called our office and you are a member of a local board and your local board sent in a formal request and said, would you please examine this topic or that topic?
I hear that.
It's required. So it's not based on theme, it's based on who requests it and what they request, and our office is required to make that determination.
So I hear that answer, but there was an exchange you had with our state senator, Lydia Edwards, I don't know, a little while ago, where she tried to get at that question. I think she was asking you for examples of where you've issued previous rulings, and it's, as best I could see from the exchange, you weren't able to answer that then, and our state senator took that as sort of some kind of a sign that you had, I think, I'm reading too much into it, but you tell me, it was that somehow it had a feeling that somehow there was this suggestion being implied in the exchange that you were doing this ruling, this decision in a way that was out of the norm, I suppose.
I mean, I certainly hope that's not what the senator was suggesting, just like I wouldn't suggest that she's fighting this audit to hide anything, in the legislature, right? Like, I would never suggest that about the senator, that she was purposefully, not supporting a legislative audit because something was fishy about something or something was being hidden. I certainly would expect that she would never insinuate something like that about our office, right?
Well,
we have
again,
a good relationship,
again,
so.
I'm just, sorry, but I was just trying to read what it looked like was going on in that exchange, and I don't want to assign any motives to the senator or to you. I just want to ask you what you're saying.
Certainly. I think it's important that, again, we recognize that everybody has jobs to do. We work together, we do our best, and I do think that being adults in a room is important, and making sure that we stay focused on the topic at hand and not asking leading questions meant to allege different motives on different things, I think would better serve everybody in our communities. So again, we're happy to answer any questions, but especially nowadays where folks are looking at overrides for their schools. We have teachers being laid off. I know in my community, my original district, there's a situation where there were like 40 teachers or something getting laid off, and there are a lot of issues with costs being through the roof for our local municipalities. The Office of State Auditor simply serves to make sure that if the state owes you money, that money is coming back to your community. We do not decide what folks think about the SJC's decision or don't think about it. We just make sure that the community gets the funding that they are entitled to, and it's important that that be recognized and not weaponized on either side of some of these conversations.
What about the potential reverse? Is it possible, or is this even in your sort of ambit, which is if the action by the state actually produces money for the town? Because in the case of 3A, there are those who suggest that actually it's a financial benefit to a town to allow more housing because you get more tax revenue, and especially if you have proportionally fewer students in there. So I guess I'm trying to understand how you decided that it was a net negative for cities and towns to have 3A. Maybe is it possible it's a net positive for them, and that therefore maybe the town should pay the state?
I mean, look, the law is the law. The SJC made the determination, and my answer regarding the fact that our office is trying to make sure that the law is followed, the local mandate law, and make sure that cities and towns get their fair share from the state. Certainly, if you want to make an argument like that, you are a resident of our community, more than welcome to raise your voice about what you think about these different things. We do live in a free state where that still is an option for you to make your case. But our office does have to follow the law, Paul, and the law stipulates that if a mandate is put on a community, that the state has to fund it. Definitely, if you think that you want to have a conversation about some other stuff, certainly, I mean, it's a free space.
Well, I'm a resident of both the state and the town, so
free speech is a thing.
Well, as most people are resident of both the state and the town, so I don't know an individual person would have a sort of a dog in that fight. I guess maybe now that you're saying it, it makes it sound like maybe the question is, should the state make that argument? I mean, is there room for the state to make the argument that by passing 3A, we've done towns and cities and towns a favor for which we should be reimbursed? Is Is that,
As
is that
the
plausible argument?
auditor, I'm here to talk about what our office does, and I think that hypothetical questions about different policies and stuff, certainly there's a place for that. I think when we're talking about an issue as serious as this, just to be clear, once again, Paul, our office is following the law that requires that we make a determination and that we let folks know that if the law is a mandate, it does have to be contemporaneously funded. Now, the legislature could have exempted this law from the conversation, like they did the education reform bill. The education reform bill back in the 90s, I believe it was, the state legislature, they actually decided to have a notwithstanding provision, which exempted it from the local mandate law. They did not do that with this particular bill. They have done it with other bills. They decided to open a grant program instead. And our office is simply saying that, they could consider using that grant program as the method by which they can fund these initiatives and just make it so that it's not only possible for communities to get that funding, but that it's mandatory that communities get that funding. Again, for our office to be weaponized on this side or the other side really is not appropriate. Really, we're just providing information. People have their own political positions on things. The Office of State Auditor, again, calls balls and strikes.
Right.
And the goal is to make sure that funding that is legally due to communities comes back to your communities. And the reason why that exists is to make sure that you can make investments in education, that you can make investments in your local infrastructure, that your cities and towns can operate the way that they need to be able to operate. And yes, so that they can increase housing opportunities as well. That's certainly why we want to make sure you're getting your fair share in this. The goal of the legislation is to increase housing, right?
Well,
so our office is saying that's the goal, and if the state is serious about that, we need to fulfill our end of the bargain as well. And when there's a mandate, it needs to be funded.
If we have time to squeeze in one more question, it's on that what you're raising right there, which is that I believe when you ran for auditor, you talked about using the power of the Office of the Auditor to actually help with housing and help fight discrimination in housing, expand housing. Is that what you promised, and is there anything you can tell people about that you're doing in that regard?
Yeah, sure. We're actually looking at the emergency shelter system right now. We are looking at EOHLC overall, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, and we are looking at some of the issues over there that can be remedied and resolved and worked upon to help make government work better, to help make sure that our tax dollars are being used efficiently and effectively, so more dollars can go towards investments that are appropriate and be used, consistent with the law and consistent with regulations. And we'll actually be releasing that report very shortly, and I look forward to that. And we're not able to discuss the results of an audit until it's officially released, unfortunately, according to auditing standards, but that will all be a matter of public record for you to review very shortly.
Okay. Well, thank you. We've had today Diana DiZoglio, the auditor of the state of Massachusetts. Very grateful for you coming into Winthrop and taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.